Every night, when the clock struck 11, I would hear his footsteps in the hallway and tremble. "Today is lesson day," he would say. And on the other side of the wall, my mother would simply turn the key to lock her own bedroom door. For years, I lived in silence until a 3-minute phone call changed everything. Good morning, my dear friends. What a joy to share my story with you today. My name is Lucy Thompson. I'm 67 years old and live in this blessed little town of Hot Springs, Arkansas. You know, this town has natural thermal springs that are a true gift from God for the tired bones of this grandma. I ended up here decades ago when I needed to restart my life, but that's a story for later. I really want to ask you to pay attention to my story because it's quite difficult for me to share with you, but at the same time, it's liberating. And you, my dear viewers watching right now, tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Are you having your morning coffee, resting after lunch, or already cozy in bed at night? I love reading all the comments, and I'm so happy to know there are people from all corners of this great nation listening to me. Let's share that affection, okay? Today I want to share a difficult story with you, but one that needs to be told. A story about silences that hurt more than screams, about locked doors that should protect, but end up imprisoning. It's not easy to talk about certain things, but time has taught me that wounds only truly heal when we let the sun and air touch them. I'll tell you how I survived a childhood where danger didn't come from the streets, but lived inside my home, and how a single phone call made with the trembling hands of a frightened girl was able to change everything. Perhaps my story will help someone going through the same thing I did, or someone who knows a child who needs help and doesn't know how to take the first step. But before talking about the storm, let's start at the beginning, from the time when I was just a little girl full of dreams, before learning that not all parents know how to be real parents. I was born in Oakville, a small town in eastern Kentucky, back in 1958. It was a town where everyone knew each other and houses barely needed locks. My father, August Thompson, worked at the town's only lumber mill. He was a tall man with calloused hands and a stern gaze, respected by everyone in the community for being hardworking. My mother, Betty Thompson, was a housewife, a thin woman with her hair always tied in a tight bun who spoke softly and rarely smiled. Our house was on a little dirt road away from downtown. It was a simple house, painted green, with a large backyard where my mother grew a little bit of everything. We had 3 small bedrooms, one for my parents, another for me and my sister Cecilia, and a third for my brother Henry, who was the oldest. The kitchen was the heart of the house, with a wood stove that stayed lit all day and a long table where we had our meals. The routine started early. Before the sun was even up, my mother was already on her feet, lighting the stove and preparing coffee. Dad would leave for the sawmill before 7 and only return when the sun was already setting. We children would walk to the town school, almost a mile away. I loved school, you know? It was the only place where I felt truly happy. My sister Cecilia was 2 years older than me, and we had very different personalities. She was quiet, obedient, always had a book in her hand, and got the best grades. I was more like my brother Henry, talkative, curious, always wanting to know the why of things. This irritated my father, who said that a girl doesn't need to be smart, she needs to learn how to take care of a house. The games of that time were simple, but so much fun. After school and house chores, I and the other kids on the street, Janet, Oliver, and the twins Ricky and Robbie, would get together to play tag, hide and seek, and hopscotch. On rainy days, we'd stay on the porch playing jacks or making rag dolls that my mother taught us to sew. Sundays were special days because we all went to church. My mother would wear her only nice dress, blue with tiny flowers, and pin a cloth flower in her hair that she made herself. It was the only time I saw her get dressed up. After Mass, sometimes Dad would take us for ice cream in the town square on days when he was in a good mood. But not everything was rosy. From a young age, I realized our house had different rules than my friends' houses. Dad was in charge, and his word was law. My mother rarely disagreed with him, and when she did, It was always in whispers in the kitchen, away from our ears. There was something in her gaze that troubled me, the look of someone carrying an invisible weight, of someone who learned to make herself small so as not to bother anyone. School grades were a major source of tension at home. Cecilia never had problems with that, but Math and I didn't get along. Each report card with a failing grade meant a storm at home. Dad would bang on the table forcefully and shout that I was stupid, that I was wasting his money. "What's the use of spending on notebooks and pencils if you don't learn anything?" he would say. It was on my 10th birthday that things started to change. I remember it like it was yesterday. My mother had made a cornbread cake with guava paste, my favorite. We sang Happy Birthday just with family. There was no big party. When it was over, Dad called me to talk in his and Mom's bedroom. "Now you're starting to become a young lady," he said. "You need to learn that everything in life has a price. If you don't improve these grades, I'll have to teach you another way." I didn't really understand what he meant that day. All I know is that from then on, Dad started paying more attention to my homework, becoming more demanding, more present. And it wasn't a good presence, my dears. It was a shadow that kept growing, until it took over the whole house. My mother noticed the change. I could see in her eyes a different kind of fear when Dad called me to review the lessons. She became even quieter, as if she were slowly disappearing. On nights when Dad came home smelling of whiskey from Mr. Arlen's store, she would quickly send Cecilia and Henry to bed and stay in the kitchen, washing and rewashing the same pot, with tense shoulders, waiting. It was during this time that I started having constant nightmares. I dreamed of locked doors, dark hallways, of monsters that had my father's voice. Cecilia, who slept in the bed next to mine, would wake me up when I screamed during the night. "Shh, everything will be okay," she would whisper, but her eyes told a different story. At school, Miss Isabel began to notice I was different. "What happened, Lucy? You used to be so participative in class," she asked me one day after everyone had left. I swallowed hard and lied. "Nothing, miss. I'm just tired." But inside, a silent scream was asking for help. At the county fair, the annual celebration that happened in town, I observed other families. Fathers who laughed with their children, who lifted them on their shoulders to better see the parades, who held their hands with affection. And I wondered why my family was different, why my father only knew how to yell and punish, and my mother only knew how to hide and obey. What was wrong with us? The winter of that year was particularly harsh. The nights became longer and darker, and it was on one of those nights that I heard, for the first time, the sound of the key turning in the lock of my parents' bedroom door, after my father had called me to help with a job. On the other side of the wall, my mother's silence was deafening. The year I turned 12 was when everything got worse. My body was starting to change. You know how it is, that age when you're no longer a child, but not yet a young woman either. My father started looking at me differently, a look that chilled me inside. "You're starting to look like your mother when she was young," he would say, and it wasn't a compliment. It was as if he were evaluating an object. The nights became torment. The clock in the living room striking 11 was like an announcement of a storm. Dad would finish listening to the radio program, take the last sip of whiskey, and then I would hear his heavy footsteps in the hallway. "Lucy, come here and help Dad with something," he would call, with that voice that didn't allow for refusal. The first time I heard the click of the lock on my mother's bedroom door, I thought it had been my imagination. I was standing in the middle of the hallway, trembling, while my father waited for me at his bedroom door. I looked at the closed door of the room where my mother should be, and for a second, I waited for her to come out, to say something, to protect me. But all I heard was silence. "What is it, girl? Are you deaf? Come quickly. I need your help with these accounts," my father would say, holding a notebook of lumber mill records. That's how it always started, with some excuse. Sometimes it was the accounts, other times it was to teach discipline because of bad grades, or to teach a lesson because I had talked back or disobeyed some house rule. At first I believed it was just that, a father who was too severe. Until one day, after a particularly painful spanking because of a math test where I got a failing grade, he held my face firmly and said something I'll never forget. "You know why I'm doing this? It's because your mother is useless now. Someone has to learn the lessons in this house." That night, I cried myself to sleep. The next day at school, Miss Isabel called me after class. "Lucy, what happened to your hands?" she asked, looking at the red marks from the paddle. I hid my hands behind my back and said I had fallen while playing. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but she didn't insist either. It was as if a silent agreement existed throughout the town. Family problems stay inside the home. At home, Cecilia began to realize something was wrong. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, she sat on the edge of my bed. "What does Dad do with you in his room?" she asked in an almost inaudible whisper. I felt a lump in my throat and couldn't answer. He hurts you, doesn't he?" she insisted, holding my hand. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Why doesn't Mom do anything?" I asked her. Cecilia sighed deeply. "She's afraid. Don't you remember when we were younger? How he used to beat her? One day she tried to defend Henry when Dad was drunk, and she got beaten so badly she was bedridden for a week. Since then..." She didn't need to complete the sentence. I vaguely remembered that episode. Mom with her face all bruised, saying to everyone that she had fallen down the stairs. The pastor visiting our house, talking at length with Dad on the porch. The neighbors bringing food and looking at Mom with a mixture of pity and disapproval. "If it's not you, it will be her," Cecilia said softly. That's what he told Mom. Either he takes out his anger on you, or it's on her. And she chose. That revelation was like a punch to the stomach. My own mother knew what was happening and had made a choice. She chose to protect herself, leaving me alone with him. The person who should have protected me was complicit in my suffering. Time went by, and I became increasingly quiet and withdrawn. At school, my grades got even worse. I couldn't concentrate. I spent the classes watching the clock, afraid of the time to go back home. My friends, who used to play with me all the time, gradually drifted away. I didn't smile anymore, didn't participate in conversations, didn't accept invitations to go to their houses. Janet was the only one who persisted. One day, after class, she pulled me to a corner of the schoolyard. "Lucy, what's happening? You look like a ghost lately." I swallowed hard, not knowing what to say, how to explain something that I myself didn't fully understand. "It's your father, isn't it?" she suddenly asked. "My mom commented to the neighbor that your father that he's not good to you." It was the first time I realized that other people suspected. The town was too small, the walls too thin. But nobody did anything. It was as if there was a silent pact. You don't interfere in family matters. On a particularly cold night in July 1971, something different happened. My father had come home from the sawmill earlier and was in a very bad mood. Some problem with the payment, I heard him complain to my mother in the kitchen. I quickly drank my milk and tried to slip into my room unnoticed, but he saw me. "Where do you think you're going, Lucy? Come here." His tone made me freeze. I looked at my mother, silently begging for help, but she just lowered her head and started washing the dinner dishes as if nothing was happening. "Your school report card arrived today," he said, showing the paper that I knew contained more failing grades than passing ones. "What did I say about these grades?" "I'm sorry, Dad," I muttered, already feeling tears forming. "I tried." "Tried? Tried!" he shouted, hitting the table so hard that the cups rattled. "Do you know how much it costs to keep you in school? And this is how you thank me?" He got up and took the belt hanging behind the kitchen door. I saw my mother tense up, but she continued with her back turned, washing the same pot repeatedly. Cecilia, who was in the living room crocheting, stood up as if to intervene, but one look from my father made her sit back down. "To my room. Now," he ordered, and I had no choice but to obey. As I walked down the hallway, I saw my mother close her eyes tightly, as if to block out what was about to happen. And then I heard what would become the most terrible sound of my childhood, the click of the lock on her bedroom door. That night, the lessons went beyond the usual. It wasn't just yelling and paddling. There was a new hatred in his eyes, fueled by frustration from work, by drink, by everything he considered wrong in life. And I was the perfect target to unload all of it. "If you were a boy, you wouldn't give so much trouble," he said between his teeth. "Women are only good for causing problems, just like your mother." When I finally managed to get back to my room, hours later, I found Cecilia awake, waiting for me. Without saying a word, she cleaned my face with a damp cloth, fixed my hair, and helped me lie down. "One day, this will end," she whispered. "You just need to hold on a little longer. When I turn 18, I'll take you with me far away from here." That promise was the only thread of hope I clung to. Cecilia was 16, I was 13. 2 more years, and we would be free. But 2 years seemed like an eternity. The next morning, I looked at myself in the small, cracked mirror in our room and didn't recognize the girl looking back at me. There was an empty look in those eyes, as if something had broken forever. At the breakfast table, nobody talked about the previous night. My mother avoided my gaze. Henry was absorbed in his own thoughts, and Dad read the newspaper as if nothing had happened. It was on this day that I realized I couldn't wait 2 years. Something needed to change, and quickly. But what? Who could I ask for help? Who could I tell? And who would believe me? The word of a girl against that of a man respected in the community. It was then that I remembered something Miss Isabel had mentioned in class. About a new sheriff's office that had been inaugurated in the neighboring town, with a female sheriff. "They say she's different," one of the mothers commented at the school exit, "that she listens to women." And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. The rest of that year of 1971 was like living in a nightmare that had no end. School, which had been my refuge before, became a place where I could barely concentrate. My grades continued to fall, which only gave more reasons for my father to apply his lessons. It was a terrible, vicious cycle. The more he punished me, the less I was able to learn. The less I learned, the more he punished me. I began to notice changes in my body that scared me even more. I lost weight, my hair began to fall out, and I had such strong nightmares that I woke up screaming almost every night. Cecilia did what she could to comfort me, but she was suffering too. Once I caught her crying alone in the backyard, behind the washing tub. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting next to her. "I feel so powerless," she whispered. "I wish I could do more for you, but I'm as afraid of him as you are." It was at that moment that I realized I couldn't wait for someone from the family to save me. My mother was paralyzed by fear. Cecilia was just a frightened teenager too, and Henry, my older brother, hardly appeared at home anymore. He had found a job on a distant farm and only came back on Sundays, perhaps also fleeing from the suffocating environment of our house. Isolation was the worst of all. At school, the other girls avoided me as if I had a contagious disease. Perhaps they sensed there was something wrong with me, something broken they couldn't name. Or maybe their parents had warned them to stay away from August's daughter, as if what happened in our house could somehow contaminate them. Only Janet continued trying to approach me. One day, she followed me on the way home and insisted we talk. "Lou, please, tell me what's happening. You're not the same anymore. You look like a scared little bird all the time." I looked at her, desperately wanting to tell everything, to unload all that weight I carried alone. But the words wouldn't come out. How to explain the inexplicable? How to put into words what I myself tried not to think about? "It's your father, isn't it?" she continued, her eyes fixed on mine. "The whole town comments, you know, that he's not good to you." I felt my face burn with shame. The idea that people knew, that they commented about us behind our backs, was humiliating. But the worst was knowing that, even knowing, Nobody did anything. "And why doesn't anyone help?" was all I managed to say, my voice breaking. Janet lowered her eyes. "Adults say you shouldn't interfere in family matters. That your father is a respected man, a hard worker. My mother even talked to the pastor once, but he said they are trials that God sends and that your mother should pray more." Pray. As if prayers could stop my father's fists or open the locked door of my mother's room. At Christmas that year, we had a small celebration at home. Dad was in a good mood. He had received a bonus at the sawmill. He brought presents for everyone, a blouse for Mom, a book for Cecilia, a shirt for Henry, and for me, a rag doll. For a few hours we seemed like a normal family. Mom even smiled while serving dinner, and Dad told stories from his youth that made us laugh. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe things could change, that maybe the loving father of that night could permanently replace the monster of the lesson nights. But this illusion didn't last long. Soon after New Year's, we returned to the usual routine. The difference is that now I had something new to worry about. Miss Isabel had called me after class to say that if my grades didn't improve, I might have to repeat the year. "What's happening, Lucy? You were one of the best students, and now you can barely pay attention in class," she said, concerned. I swallowed hard, unable to answer. She sighed and put her hand on my shoulder. "If you need to talk about anything, I'm here." I almost told her everything at that moment. Her eyes were kind, her hand on my shoulder seemed genuinely concerned. But then I remembered Janet's words about how the town treated these family matters. What if Miss Isabel was like the others? What if she didn't believe me? Or worse, if she believed but did nothing, like everyone else? That night when I told about the possibility of repeating the year, my father exploded like never before. His anger wasn't just because of the grades, but because of what they represented in the eyes of the community. A failure, a shame. "You want to make me look like a clown in the entire town?" he shouted, his face red. "Everyone will say that August's daughter is too stupid to pass the year." What followed was the worst night I had ever experienced until then. The lessons were so severe that the next day I could barely get out of bed. My mother, seeing my condition, even suggested that I stay at home, but Dad didn't allow it. "She's going to school even if she has to be dragged," he said. "She's already causing enough problems with these grades. She's not going to miss class, too." It was on this day, walking painfully to school, that I made a decision. I couldn't continue living like this. I wouldn't survive if I continued like this. I needed to do something, anything. On the way out of school, instead of going straight home, I went to the small town store. Mr. Matthias, owner of the establishment, had the only public telephone in the region, installed in the corner of the store for use by residents, for a small fee. "Can I use the phone, Mr. Matthias?" I asked timidly. He looked at me over his glasses. "Who do you need to call, girl? Do your parents know you're here?" I lied. I said I needed to call my uncle in Somerset, that it was his birthday. Mr. Matthias didn't seem very convinced, but ended up agreeing. 5 minutes, no more than that," he warned. With trembling hands, I dialed the number of the sheriff's office in the neighboring town, Cedar Grove, which I had noted down after overhearing a conversation between two teachers. When a female voice answered on the other end, I almost hung up in fright. "Cedar Grove Sheriff's Office, how can I help you?" My voice came out almost inaudible. Is the sheriff there?" "This is Sheriff Olivia Fields. Who am I speaking with?" I hesitated. What if she didn't believe me? What if she told my father? What if everything got even worse? "Hello? Are you still there?" the voice insisted from the other end. "My father hurts me." The words came out in one breath, before I could lose courage. Every night, at 11 o'clock, he calls me to his room to give me lessons because of the bad grades and I couldn't continue. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The voice was now gentle, cautious. Lucy Thompson." "And where do you live, Lucy?" "In Oakville, on Elm Street, number 23, the green wooden house." Are you telling me your father abuses you? What kind of abuse, Lucy? I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't have words to describe what happened on those nights. He hurts me. With the belt, with his hands, and other things. My mother knows, but she locks herself in her room. She's afraid of him, too. I felt tears running down my face. Mr. Matthias was looking at me with a strange expression. I need you to listen to me carefully, Lucy, the sheriff said firmly. What your father is doing is wrong and against the law. You are not to blame for any of this, understand? None of this is your fault. These were words I had never heard before, words that contradicted everything my father always said. That I was to blame, that I provoked, that I deserved it. Are you safe now? Is he at home? The sheriff asked. No, he's at the sawmill. He only comes back late afternoon. All right. I'm going to need you to be very brave. Can you do that? I nodded, then remembered she couldn't see me. Yes, I whispered. Tonight, at 11 o'clock, when your father normally does this, I and 2 more officers will be near your house. If we hear any trouble, we'll enter immediately. But we need to catch him in the act for the arrest to be made, understand? I felt a chill run down my spine. Arrest. I had never really considered the possibility of my father being arrested. It was both frightening and liberating to think about it. And if he finds out I called? And if he... We won't let anything happen to you, she interrupted me. I'm promising you that. But you need to be strong one more time, just one more night. Can you do that, Lucy? I looked at the clock on the store wall. It was almost 5 in the afternoon. In a few hours, I would be at home, facing my father. And a few hours after that, at 11, everything could change. I can, I finally responded. I'll be waiting for you. When I hung up the phone, my legs were shaking so much that I needed to lean on the counter. Mr. Matthias was looking at me with an expression that mixed concern and something else. Guilt, perhaps. Did you hear? I asked, suddenly worried that he would tell someone, that the news would reach my father before the night. He adjusted his glasses and sighed deeply. Girl, everyone in this town knows what happens in your house, but nobody has the courage to get involved. He paused, then added, You did the right thing in calling. You should have done it a long time ago. His words confirmed what I already suspected. Everyone knew, and nobody did anything. The conspiracy of silence that protected my father and condemned me and my mother to continuous pain. I returned home with my heart beating so hard I thought it might jump out of my chest. The next few hours would be decisive. If everything went right, that would be the last night of terror. If it went wrong, I didn't even want to think about the consequences. That night, dinner was silent as always. Dad ate with concentration, Mom served the food without saying a word, and we, children, kept our eyes fixed on our plates. But there was something different in the air. A tension that seemed thicker, as if time itself was dense, heavy. With each passing minute, my heart beat faster. I looked discreetly at the clock on the kitchen wall. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock. Time dragged with a cruel slowness. After dinner, Dad went to the living room to listen to his usual radio program with a glass of whiskey in hand. Mom washed the dishes, Cecilia helped dry them, and I pretended to do my homework at the kitchen table. My mind, however, was far away. I was thinking about what would happen soon, about the officers who, if the sheriff kept her promise, would be positioned near our house, about the possibility of everything going wrong. At 10:30, Mom announced she was going to bed. She exchanged a quick look with Dad, a look that contained a silent communication that I now understood very well. She knew what was coming. She knew and was retreating, as she always did. "Good night," she said, passing by me without looking me in the eyes. I felt a sudden anger take hold of me. How could she? How could she simply go to sleep knowing what awaited me? "Mom," I called in a last desperate attempt. "Stay. Please." She stopped for a second, her shoulders tense. For a moment, I thought that maybe, just maybe, she would turn around and say something. Defend me, finally. But she just continued her way toward the hallway, without looking back. Cecilia squeezed my hand under the table. "I'll stay awake," she whispered. "Anything happens, I'll come." But we both knew she wouldn't come. The fear of our father was greater than any courage she could gather. At 11 o'clock sharp, like a Swiss clock, Dad turned off the radio and called me. "Lucy, come here. We need to talk about your grades." I felt my entire body tremble. It was now. Would the sheriff be out there? Would she really come to save me, or had it just been an empty promise, like so many others that adults make to children? I got up from the chair with wobbly legs and followed Dad down the hallway. As I passed by my parents' room, I heard the familiar click of the lock. Mom was already locked in, safe in her refuge of denial. In his room, Dad closed the door and took off his belt. "You think I enjoy this?" he asked, his voice strangely calm. "You think it gives me pleasure to have to correct you like this?" I remained silent, my eyes fixed on the floor. Where would the police be? Could they hear what was happening inside the house? "Answer me!" he suddenly shouted, making me jump in fright. No, Dad," I stammered. "Then why do you keep provoking me? Why do you keep getting these horrible grades?" "I try, Dad, I swear I try." My voice came out almost inaudible. He came closer, the belt wrapped around his hand. "Take off your clothes." These words, which I heard almost every night, always filled me with terror. But this time, there was something different. The possibility that this was the last time. "No." The word escaped my lips before I could control it. Dad stopped, surprised. In 13 years, I had never said no to him. "What did you say?" His voice was low, dangerous. At that moment, a courage I didn't know I possessed took hold of me. If the sheriff didn't come, if nobody saved me, at least I would have defended myself once. "I said no," I repeated, firmer this time, looking him directly in the eyes. "I won't let you hurt me anymore. This is wrong. You're my father. You should protect me, not hurt me." His expression went from surprise to fury in a matter of seconds. "Who do you think you are to talk to me like this? In my house?" He advanced toward me, the belt raised. "Go ahead," I challenged, my voice trembling but determined. "Hit me, like you always do, but I won't stay quiet anymore. I won't pretend this is normal anymore." The first blow came quick and strong, hitting my arm. The pain was immediate, but I didn't fold. I remained standing, my eyes fixed on his. "Who's been filling your head?" he was shouting now, out of control. "Was it that teacher of yours, or that sassy friend?" Another blow, and another. The pain was intense, but the adrenaline in my body seemed to block part of it. Where was the police? Why weren't they coming? "Nobody filled my head!" I shouted back, knowing that my voice needed to be heard from outside. "I just got tired of being your punching bag." This enraged him even more. He threw the belt aside and came at me with his hands. He grabbed my arms with such force that I felt he could break them. "You're going to learn to stay quiet," he hissed, his face inches from mine. It was at this moment that I heard it. A noise at the front door, someone knocking forcefully. A female voice shouting, "Police, open the door!" The expression on my father's face changed instantly. Confusion, then understanding, and finally a pure, incandescent hatred. "You," he whispered, his eyes fixed on mine. "It was you who called them." The knocking at the door continued, stronger now. "We know what's happening in there. Open immediately, or we'll break down the door." Dad let go of me and stepped back. For a terrible moment, I thought he was going to do something drastic, something irreversible. His eyes scanned the room, as if looking for a way out, a weapon, anything. "August Thompson, we have a judicial order. Open the door now." I heard movement in the hallway. Cecilia and my mother, probably attracted by the noise. The sheriff's voice echoed again, even firmer. "We're coming in." The sound of the door being broken down was like thunder. Heavy bootsteps crossed the house. Dad looked at me one last time, a look that contained so much anger that it made me back up against the wall. The bedroom door opened violently. Sheriff Olivia was there, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. Her eyes quickly assessed the scene, me against the wall, trembling, with red marks on my arms, my father in the middle of the room, the belt fallen beside him. "August Thompson, you are under arrest for child abuse and domestic violence," she declared, her voice firm and professional. "This is absurd," my father protested, trying to regain his composure. "I'm just disciplining my daughter." "I have that right." The sheriff was not shaken. "You don't have the right to hurt a child. You never did." She gestured to the officers, who advanced to arrest him. It was then that my father did something I'll never forget. He looked at me with such deep hatred that it seemed to pierce my soul and said, "You're dead to me. If I ever get out of jail, I'll find you." These words, said with such conviction, chilled me to the bone. Even when the officers dragged him out, handcuffed and protesting, I continued to hear them, echoing in my mind. Sheriff Olivia approached me carefully, like one approaches a frightened animal. "It's over," she said softly. "You're safe now." But I knew deep in my heart that I wasn't. Not while he was alive, not while he could fulfill his promise. In the hallway, my mother and Cecilia watched everything in a state of shock. Mom seemed to have aged 10 years in one night. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying so much. "What have you done, Lucy?" she murmured, her voice broken. "What have you done?" Those words hit me like a slap. Even now, even after everything, she was still on his side. She still blamed me for seeking help, for wanting the suffering to end. "She did what you should have done a long time ago, Mrs. Thompson," the sheriff answered for me, her tone harder now. "Protected herself, since no one else did." The days that followed were a whirlwind. There were testimonies at the police station, medical exams that documented years of abuse, social workers who came to talk to me and my mother. The entire town was talking about it. The same people who for years pretended not to see now talked of nothing else. Dad was kept in preventive detention. The judge considered the risk of escape and mainly the threat he had made against me. But the feeling of security this should have brought me was constantly undermined by the fear that one day he would be released. At home, the atmosphere was unbearable. Mom oscillated between long silences and explosions of crying. One moment she would hug me, asking for forgiveness for not having protected me. The next, she would accuse me of having destroyed our family. "How are we going to survive without him?" she would ask, desperation evident in her voice. "He was the one who supported this house." Cecilia tried to mediate, sometimes consoling Mom, sometimes defending me. But she was too young to carry this weight. Henry, when he found out what had happened, came home for a few days. We talked at length, and he confessed to me that he had also suffered abuse from Dad when he was a child. When I turned 16 and became taller than him, the beating stopped, he told me, his eyes tearing up. "But I never had the courage to confront him, not even to protect you. Forgive me, Lou." These words brought a little comfort, the confirmation that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't the only victim. But they also brought more anger at the omission of so many, for so long. A week after my father's arrest, Sheriff Olivia came to visit us. She sat at our dinner table and explained that the process would be long, that there would be a trial, that I would need to testify. "And if he's released?" I asked, my voice trembling. He said he would find me, that I was dead to him. The sheriff exchanged a look with a social worker who accompanied her, a gray-haired lady named Dolores. "That's why we're here," Dolores said gently. "We're proposing that you go live with a foster family in another town, at least until the trial." "Another town?" I repeated, surprised. I had never thought about leaving Oakville. Despite everything, it was the only home I knew. "It would be safer," the sheriff explained. And it would give you and your family time to recover, to think about the future. What town? I asked, my mind spinning with possibilities. Louisville, Dolores replied. It's a bigger city, with more resources. We have a very good family there, willing to receive you. You could continue studying, have a new beginning. A new beginning. The words echoed in my mind like a promise. Away from Oakville, away from the looks of pity and judgment, away from the room where so many nights of terror had happened. I looked at my mother, awaiting her reaction. She was sitting beside me, her hands trembling slightly. Maybe it's better this way, she finally said, avoiding my gaze. For a while. Her words were like a final admission that she couldn't protect me, that she never could. It was a goodbye, a veiled abandonment, but also, in a way, an act of love. The recognition that I would be safer away from her. That night, lying in my bed, looking at the familiar ceiling for what could be the last time, I felt a mix of emotions. Fear of the unknown, sadness for leaving Cecilia and Henry, anger that it was me and not my father who needed to leave the house. But there was also a new sensation, something I hadn't felt for so long that I almost didn't recognize it. Hope. The possibility of a different life, a life without constant fear, without the clock striking 11 like a sentence. In the darkness of the room, I made a promise to myself. No matter what happened from then on, no matter how many times I had to start over or where I had to go, I would never again allow someone to make me feel so small, so powerless. I would never again be silent in the face of injustice, be it against me or against anyone else. And it was with that promise kept in my heart that I fell asleep, preparing myself to leave behind the only home I knew and plunge into an uncertain but free future. On the morning I left Oakville, the sky was covered by a thin mist that gave everything a dreamlike appearance. Sitting in the back seat of social worker Dolores's car, I looked through the window at the familiar streets that I might never see again. We passed by the school where I studied, by the church where we went on Sundays, by the square where we played on summer afternoons. Each place held memories, some good, many painful. The farewell to my family was more difficult than I had imagined. Mom, despite her ambivalence in the previous days, cried hugging me as if she would never see me again. Cecilia promised to visit me as soon as she could, and Henry gave me a small wooden crucifix that he had carved himself. To protect you, he said, placing it in my hand, and to remind you that there's always someone looking out for you. The journey to Louisville took almost 5 hours, mostly on dirt roads. I observed the landscape changing through the window, the cornfields, the imposing oak trees, the small villages we passed through. Each mile took me away from the past and brought me closer to an uncertain future, but one that at least promised to be different. Louisville was much bigger than Oakville. The streets were wider, there were more cars, more people, more movement. I felt small and lost in that new world. The family that received me was composed of the couple Theodore and Zelda Mendoza, and their 2 grown children who no longer lived with them. Alfred, who studied medicine in Chicago, and Irene, who was a teacher in Indianapolis. Their house was in a quiet neighborhood with a yard full of fruit trees. It was a brick house with 3 bedrooms, very different from our wooden house in Oakville. Zelda showed me where I would sleep, a small but cozy room with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a desk. This was Irene's room, she explained. Now it's yours for as long as you need. That first night was strange, lying in a bed that wasn't mine, in a room I didn't know, in a city where I didn't have anyone. I cried softly until falling asleep, hugging the wooden crucifix that Henry had given me. The first days were about adaptation. Theodore worked as an accountant in an agricultural cooperative, and Zelda was a nurse in the city's only hospital. Both left early and returned late afternoon. During the day, I stayed with Mrs. Ellen, a lady who lived next door and who took care of me and the house while the couple worked. A week after my arrival, I was enrolled in a new school. I was behind in the school year, But the principal, informed of my situation by the social worker, ensured they would do everything possible to help me catch up on the lost time. On the first day of class, I entered the room with my heart in my hand. 30 pairs of curious eyes turned to me when teacher Nancy introduced me as a new student coming from Oakville. I sat in the last desk, trying to make myself invisible. During recess, I stayed alone in a corner of the yard, observing the other children playing. A girl approached, offering me half of her snack. "Hi, I'm Leah," she said with a smile. "Do you want a piece of my cornbread? My mom made it this morning." It was my first friendship in Louisville and one of the most important of my life. Leah was the daughter of farmers from the region, talkative and curious. It didn't take long for us to start walking together at school, and soon she invited me to visit her house on weekends. Leah's family, her parents, Stephen and Nora, and her 4 younger brothers, received me as if I were part of them. They never asked about my past or why I was living with the Mendozas. They simply included me in their Sunday lunches, in their birthday parties, in their daily lives. Meanwhile, the investigation about my father followed its course. Every 2 weeks, social worker Dolores would come from Cedar Grove to visit me and update me on the case. Dad continued in preventive detention, and the trial was scheduled for 3 months from then. I would be called to testify. The idea of facing my father again terrified me. In the weeks leading up to the trial, I began to have nightmares again. I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, my body covered in sweat. Zelda, with her experience as a nurse and her generous heart, started to leave a chair next to my bed. Many nights she stayed there, holding my hand until I fell asleep again. "You are stronger than you think, Lucy," she would tell me, "and you're not alone in this fight." The day of the trial arrived like a storm that had been announcing itself for a long time. We traveled to Cedar Grove, me, Zelda, and Theodore, who had made a point of taking a day off to accompany me. At the courthouse, we found Sheriff Olivia, who gave me a tight hug. "Ready?" she asked, looking me in the eyes. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. The courtroom was full. I recognized many faces from Oakville, neighbors, acquaintances from church. Even Miss Isabel was there. My mother and my siblings were sitting together in one of the first rows. Cecilia waved to me, her eyes full of tears. And then he entered, escorted by 2 officers. My father seemed to have aged 10 years in these few months. He was thinner, with an unshaven beard, sunken eyes. For a moment, our gazes crossed, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was so much anger in those eyes, so much bitterness. The trial lasted the entire day. Witness after witness reported what they knew, or what they should have known, but pretended not to see. Miss Isabel spoke about the marks she had seen on me over the years, about how I had changed from a happy girl to a silent shadow. Mr. Matthias from the store confirmed that I had used his phone to call the sheriff's office and that everyone in town knew what happened in that house. When it was my turn to testify, my legs barely supported me. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Bernadette, was kind, asking clear questions and giving me time to answer. The defense attorney, however, tried to confuse me, insinuating that I was making up stories to get attention, that I had mental problems. "If none of this happened as you say," he questioned, "why did your mother never do anything? Why did you never tell anyone?" It was at this moment that something in me broke, or perhaps strengthened. I looked directly into that man's eyes and answered with a clarity that surprised me. "Because fear paralyzes, sir. Because when you are threatened every day, when you see your own mother being beaten for trying to defend your brother, when you hear that it's either you or her, you end up believing there is no way out. That's just how things are." I paused, breathing deeply, and continued. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here so that no other girl goes through what I went through, so that no other mother has to choose between suffering or letting her daughter suffer. I'm here because, finally, I found people who showed me that what happened to me is not normal, not acceptable, not fair." The silence in the room was so dense it seemed to have weight. I saw my mother cover her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking in silent sobs. Cecilia hugged her, crying too. At the end of the day, the judge announced his sentence. My father was sentenced to 12 years in prison for child abuse, domestic violence, and threatening behavior. As the officers took him away, he looked at me one last time and said something that only I could hear. "This isn't over." Those words haunted me for years. Even knowing he was in prison, even being miles away, the fear that one day he would fulfill his promise never completely abandoned me. After the trial, I returned to Louisville with the Mendozas. My mother tried to convince me to come back home, saying that now it would be different, that we could start over. But something inside me knew it wasn't possible. The home I had known was irreparably broken, stained by memories that I needed to leave behind. It was social worker Dolores who proposed a solution. Since I was still a minor and legally under my mother's guardianship, she suggested an agreement. I would stay with the Mendozas as a foster family until I turned 18, with regular visits from my biological family. "But what if my father gets out of prison before then?" I asked, the fear evident in my voice. "There are protective measures," explained Sheriff Olivia, who was participating in the meeting. "He will be prohibited from approaching you, from contacting you in any form. And we will be vigilant, Lucy. We won't let him hurt you again." My mother was reluctant, but ended up agreeing. Perhaps she also knew, deep down, that she couldn't protect me as I needed. The following years were about reconstruction. With the support of the Mendozas, the school, and especially Leah's family, I gradually regained confidence in myself and in others. I started smiling again, participating in classes, making plans for the future. Cecilia and Henry came to visit me frequently. My mother, not so much. I think guilt and shame prevented her. But we kept in touch through letters, and with time, our relationship slowly healed. I finished middle school in Louisville and, encouraged by Zelda, decided I wanted to be a nurse, like her. "You have the gift of caring, Lucy," she would tell me, "of transforming pain into healing." That's how, at 17, I enrolled in the nursing technical course in Indianapolis. Irene, the Mendoza's daughter, offered to host me in her apartment during my studies. It was a new city, a new phase, a step even further away from the past that had tormented me for so long. On the eve of my departure to Indianapolis, I received an unexpected visit. Leah appeared at the Mendoza's house with a small package in her hands. "It's a farewell gift," she said, handing me the package. "So you never forget who you really are." Inside was a leather-bound journal with my name engraved on the front. On the first page she had written, "For Lucy, the bravest girl I've ever known. Your story is not about what they did to you, but about how you chose to respond. With love, Leah." That journal became my confidant in the following years. In it, I wrote about my fears, my hopes, my achievements. I wrote about the day I learned that my father had died in prison, a victim of tuberculosis, without ever having shown remorse. I wrote about the reunion with my mother at his funeral, both of us in silence before the closed casket, a dark chapter finally closed. And it was also in this journal that I wrote about the day I met George, a student of agronomy who frequented the same cafe where I went to study after classes. He had a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to see beyond the invisible scars I carried. Our love story began slowly, with conversations about books and music, and grew as I learned, step by step, to trust again. George was patient, respecting my timing, my hesitations, my residual fears. In 1978, 2 years after we met, we got married in a small ceremony in Indianapolis. Present were my biological family, Mom, Cecilia, and Henry, and my chosen family, the Mendozas, Leah, and her parents. 2 parts of my life united in a celebration of hope. After George's graduation, we received a proposal to work in an agricultural cooperative in Hot Springs, a small thermal town in Arkansas. "It's a quiet place," said the recruiter. "Perfect to start a family." And that's how, at 23, I arrived in the town that would be my home for the next 44 years. Hot Springs welcomed me with its thermal waters that heal the body, while time, George's love, and the distance from the past healed my soul. Today, at 67, I look through the window of my porch here in Hot Springs and see how much life can change. The thermal waters that attract tourists from all over America are a daily reminder of healing and renewal. Like them, I was also able to emerge from the depths warm and reinvigorated after a long underground journey. George and I built a good life in this town. He worked at the agricultural cooperative for more than 3 decades, while I worked as a nursing technician at the local health clinic. We couldn't have children. Perhaps the physical and emotional scars of the past left this sequel. But we transformed this pain into love to share with others. For years, our house was a reference point for children and teenagers who needed support. We helped with homework, offered meals, listened to problems, dried tears. Without biological children, we became heart parents to dozens of young people who still visit us today, now with their own children. George was an extraordinary man, patient, kind, with a sense of humor that illuminated even the grayest days. For 25 years, we lived a love that taught me the real meaning of partnership and respect. Each day by his side helped to heal a little more the wounds of the past. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003, I felt as if the ground collapsed under my feet. After all we had overcome together, it was devastating to see him wither a little each day. I used all my nursing knowledge to care for him at home, making his last months as comfortable as possible. "Don't cry for me, Lucy," he told me the night before departing. "I had more happiness by your side than many have in a lifetime." Losing George was like going back to that childhood darkness, but this time I had tools to find the light. I had friends, I had purpose, I had precious memories to sustain me, and I had Hot Springs, this town that had truly become my home. It was in mourning that I began my medicinal herb garden. Mrs. Ophelia, a lady of Native American origin who lived in the surroundings, taught me about the healing properties of plants. "Nature has a remedy for everything," she would say, "except for longing. That only time takes care of." The garden started small, just a few pots on the porch, but soon it expanded, taking over the entire backyard. Cultivating the earth, seeing life sprout under my care, had a therapeutic effect that no conventional medicine could offer. It was through this garden that I met Jerome. He was a municipal gardener, responsible for the town squares and green areas. One day, passing in front of my house, he stopped to admire my collection of herbs. "You have a good hand for plants," he commented. "You managed to make rosemary bloom in the middle of winter." Jerome was a widower like me, having lost his wife to a stroke a few years before. We began a friendship based on our common love for nature. He brought rare seedlings for my garden. I prepared teas and ointments with my herbs for his aching knees. Gradually, that friendship blossomed into a mature and serene love. Different from the passionate love I had with George, but equally precious. We married in a simple ceremony in my house garden, surrounded by friends and by the aroma of the herbs we had cultivated together. For 12 years, Jerome was my companion, my friend, my second great love. Together we expanded the garden, began teaching children from the community about medicinal plants, created a small group for exchanging seeds and traditional knowledge. The house was always full of people, of laughter, of life. When he passed away 5 years ago, victim of a sudden heart attack while pruning the rose bushes in the municipal garden, mourning was different. There was pain, of course, but also gratitude for having been blessed with one more love in my life, when many don't even find the first. Today, I live alone in this house full of memories, but I never feel lonely. The neighbors come to have tea with me every afternoon. The neighborhood children appear to hear stories and learn about the plants. I keep in touch with Cecilia and Henry by phone. Both are already in their senior years like me, with their own children and grandchildren. Mom passed away 15 years ago, carrying with her a guilt she never completely overcame. In the last years of her life, living with Cecilia, she finally explicitly asked for my forgiveness. "I failed you when you needed me most," she said, holding my wrinkled hands in hers, even more aged. "There isn't a day I don't regret it." I forgave her, not for her, but for me. Carrying resentment is like drinking poison hoping the other person will get sick. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or approving what was done, but freeing oneself from the chains of the past. Of the people I met in Louisville, I only keep in touch with Leah. We talk a few times a year, and she has come to visit me in Hot Springs several times. She got married, had 5 children, and is now a grandmother to 11 grandchildren. The leather journal she gave me is still with me, now accompanied by several others where I record thoughts, herb recipes, moments of gratitude. My routine today is simple and tranquil. I wake up with the sunrise and go straight to the garden to take care of my plants while the air is still fresh. After that, I have my coffee calmly on the porch, observing the movement of the town that slowly awakens. I usually dedicate mornings to crafts. I learn to make rag dolls and small ornaments with natural materials from the garden. In the afternoon, I receive visits or go to the center of town to shop and meet acquaintances. The nights are for reading, for watching a little television, for reflecting on life. Once a week, I give volunteer classes about medicinal herbs at the community center. It's my way of passing on the knowledge I acquired, of keeping alive the tradition that Mrs. Ophelia shared with me. I learned that life rarely follows the path we plan. It takes us through unexpected detours, some painful, others surprisingly beautiful. The important thing is to keep walking, one step at a time, believing that even in the darkest nights, the sun will always shine again. And here I am, Lucy Thompson, sitting on the porch of my house in Hot Springs, surrounded by the aroma of the herbs from my garden, weaving the threads of my story to share with you. A story of pain, yes, but also of healing, of rebirth, of small daily miracles that, added up, compose a full life. My dears, who have accompanied me this far on this journey of memories, I want to leave with you some words that I carry in my heart. Words that I learned not from books, but in the trenches of life itself. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but our capacity to start anew each day. Each morning that I wake up and see the sun rising over Hot Springs is a new chance, a new beginning, a new reason to be thankful. When I look back at that frightened girl that I was, I want to hug her and tell her that everything will be okay, that the scars don't disappear completely, but become marks of a battle won. My wrinkles are maps of survival, each one tells a story of pain overcome. If you are going through difficult times, if you feel that the walls are closing around you, if you think there is no way out of the darkness that surrounds you, I want you to know, you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not to blame for the evil that others chose to do. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even when it seems that all is lost, that there is no hope, there is always a small spark inside us that refuses to die. It's this spark that we need to protect, to nourish until it grows and illuminates our path again. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. I learned that we can lose things, people, places, but our essence, who we really are, that no one can take unless we allow it. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. There is a reserve of strength inside each of us that we only discover in the most difficult moments. It's like those plants in my garden that seem to die in winter but keep life in their roots, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. Don't expect the pain to disappear completely. It can transform, diminish, but it will be part of your story. The important thing is not to let it define who you are or become the center of your existence. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have become bitter, distrustful, closed off to the world. I would have had reasons for that. But I chose another path, that of healing, of forgiveness, especially of myself, of openness to new possibilities. If you know someone who is going through situations of abuse or violence, don't turn a blind eye. Don't be like those Oakville residents who knew but didn't interfere. A word of support, a gesture of solidarity, sometimes even a simple, sincere question, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" can change an entire life. And if you are the one suffering, know that asking for help is not weakness. It's an act of courage and self-love. In every city, in every community, there are people and organizations ready to extend a hand. Don't be afraid to seek them out. The life you deserve, safe, dignified, happy, is waiting for you. I remember a lavender plant in my garden that was almost destroyed by a strong frost. It seemed that nothing was left but dry branches. Jerome wanted to pull it out, but I asked that we wait. Months later, small green shoots began to emerge from the base. Today, it's one of the strongest and most fragrant bushes I have. We are like that lavender, capable of being reborn even when it seems there is no more life in us. I learned that true strength is not in never falling, but in getting up every time. Each time we rise after a fall, we become a little stronger, a little wiser, a little more prepared for the challenges that are still to come. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. Like the thermal waters that spring here in hot springs, they pass through rocks, darkness, and pressure, but emerge warm, healing, full of valuable minerals obtained precisely because of this difficult journey. My dear sons and daughters of the heart who are watching me now, I want you to do something for this grandma here. Subscribe to this channel, Grandparents' Tales, hit the bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that there is hope after pain. By doing this, you're not just supporting who tells these stories, but you're extending a hand to someone who may be feeling as alone as I once felt. At this moment of the video, less than 5% of people are still actually listening to me. So for me to know who's here, comment the word faith, so I'll know you watched until the end and understood the most important message, that no matter how dark the night is, the sun will always, always shine again. Do this now. Don't wait another minute. This simple action can be the ray of light that someone is waiting for to find their own way back to life. God bless you, my dears. Until our next conversation, from my porch in Hot Springs to the heart of each one of you,